Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to one of our Ramaz Zoom opportunities for professional and personal growth and development. It's wonderful to have all of you with us. We begin as we begin each of our Zooms by wishing a refuah shlema to all those that are ill during this very difficult time. We also want to wish our condolences to all those that have lost loved ones. Just this morning, it was announced that a Ramaz parent, for the first time, we have lost a Ramaz parent to COVID-19, and we pray together with the family that they are comforted during this very difficult time by having a community, a very strong community like the Ramaz and KJ communities that will stand together with them. And we want to also be thankful to all of our frontline medical professionals who continue to do God's work. And we thank them for what they do, and we stand with you as well during this time period. With that said, we do want to begin our Zoom today. Today's Zoom is called Residential Real Estate Roundtable, the State of the Market, Financial and Legal Ramifications. We have brought together an outstanding panel of professionals, and I'll introduce them to you. Our moderator today, Adam Modlin, is the CEO of the Modlin Group. The Modlin Group is a boutique real estate agency in New York City. It's founded by Adam in 1999, and the company has a 20-year track record for closing high-profile, complex transactions. The company has built its business solely on developing personal relationships with clients which span around the globe. Modlin Group has a reputation for its commitment to excellence, character, integrity, and respect, and the company has a niche for representing townhouses, penthouses, and large residences. With a personal touch, the Modlin Group plays the role as advisor and partner, guiding its clients with discretion, trust, privacy, professionalism, and passion at its core. The Modlin Group has developed alliances and advises clients not only in New York, but also in the Hamptons, Boston, Miami, Los Angeles, London, and well beyond. The most important thing to know about today's moderator, Adam Modlin, is that he's married to an outstanding Ramaz alumna and is also the proud parent of a Ramaz alumna and a current Ramaz student. Beth Benalloul, she is a senior associate broker with the Corcoran Group. Beth is an accomplished Manhattan real estate professional who has received coveted awards for her fine work that includes membership in the Corcoran's prestigious President's Council, placing her among the top 25 brokers in her company. Beth has also been recognized as a repeated top producer in her Carnegie Hill office as a broker of the year. Additionally, she is someone that has received accolades and continues to receive awards in all of the various things that she's involved in. She has loyal clients who have benefited from her expertise, her vast knowledge as a native New Yorker, combined with her patient yet persistent approach to getting her clients what they want, make her an invaluable partner in the real estate process. Beth is the mother of a wonderful, wonderful Ramaz student. Wendy Greenbaum. I don't want to actually give her a year unless she gives me permission to.
Okay.
But you would never know. She's class of 72. She is the senior vice president at Warburg Realty. Wendy Greenbaum is one of the 8 original broker partners of Warburg Realty. She has had a distinguished 30-year history as one of the top producers at the firm. Highly regarded by both brokers and her clients, she is the consummate professional, discreet, direct, and thoughtful. A broad, diverse client base, including numerous international investors and top professionals from finance, law, and entertainment, and politics. She has handled some of the most complicated transactions on behalf of nonprofits and profit institutions, and they include all of the Ramaz and KJ institutional residential purchases and sales over the many years. Her clients count on her direct approach and clear understanding of financial intricacies to guide them through these transactions. She is also the proud mother of 4 Ramaz alumni and is now a Ramaz grandma, which we love to see her back in the halls and walls of Ramaz. Adam Peldman, co-founder of Gotham Abstract and Settlement LLC. Adam is the co-founder and leads its business development for the Gotham Abstract. He has over 20 years of experience in residential and commercial real estate, ranging from working at his family's real estate brokerage company to developing his own residential mortgage brokerage business. In 2016, Adam started Gotham Abstract and Settlement. He brings a wealth of practical experience to his work and believes that it's important to be involved in all steps of the business process. In addition to maintaining positive relationships with lenders, developers, purchasers, and attorneys, Adam oversees the title process from the point the abstract is ordered through the recording of all of the documents. This close attention to detail and boutique style distinguish Gotham's approach in the field. Adam is most importantly the proud parent of current Ramaz students. Todd Zuckerman, class of 2000, or TJ as I like to call him. He is the co-founding partner at Sedgh and Zuckerman PLLC, residential real estate law firm, which has offices in both Manhattan, in Midtown, and in Garden City, Long Island. He represents individual buyers and sellers in the purchase of their home and handles many of the firm's co-op and condo transactions in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Todd also serves as a closing attorney for several national lenders on their single family and co-op condo transactions, as well as their refinance SEMA loans. He has been an outstanding partner to so many people within the Ramaz and KJ community during these transactions. He is married to a fellow alumna, to a Ramaz alumna, and hopes to be a Ramaz parent in the very near future. That was my line, TJ, so I hope you don't mind that I threw it in. I thank you all for being here. I'm just going to remind everyone that the only way to communicate with us today is using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Many of you already sent in questions that will be the beginning of the presentation that Adam will do this afternoon with you, but you can also put in new questions into the Q&A, and we will take as many of those questions as possible during today's discussion. Again, thank you all for being with us today, and please enjoy this roundtable. Thank you in advance to all the professionals for your time and efforts. Adam?
Thank you very much, Kenny. Thank you for having all of us. It's a pleasure to be here today with the community. And as you say, first and foremost, we hope that everyone is in good health, safe, and well. As for the topic today, the state of the residential market, as many industries have been heavily impacted by COVID-19, we as well in the residential real estate market have been heavily affected. For many of you who may know or not, Governor Cuomo has classified residential brokerage services as non-essential workers, and we are waiting for phase 2 to be able to come back to work. So for all intents and purposes, we have had our businesses shut down since the middle of March, and we will all discuss today the different ways that we've been adapting and working in this environment. But given that we are not an essential service, and legally, according to the governor, we have not been able to show real estate for the past 3 months in New York City, and we have been utilizing different tools that we can discuss in the virtual and technology world, everyone is probably curious, what is the state of the market and what is the pulse of the market? Wendy, if we can start with you.
So if we're going to talk about the pulse of the market, it sounds like a medical diagnosis. I would have to say the pulse right now is weak. As you just explained very well, Governor Cuomo's orders have made it impossible for us to show apartments, which means initiating any new transactions at this point is virtually impossible. We do have some business that was left over, businesses that deals that were already in process, so those deals have continued. It has been possible to do closings, but very difficult, many restrictions on how closings take place. So that has slowed the market down considerably, but we should also just take a step back and remember that we came into the whole shutdown due to COVID in a very weak market already. We didn't come from a very strong market and then all of a sudden there was a shutdown and it turned into a crisis. Prices have been dropping, inventory was building up before this started, and you know, that the shutdown has only complicated that, but the market is slow now, the market is weak. There are very few transactions, and once phase 2 begins, we're going to see then how this is going to change. Will there be a different balance of buyers and sellers than before? Probably, but none of us know yet the extent of that. We don't know exactly how much new inventory is going to come on immediately after phase 2 begins. And of course, we don't know yet what the exact effect on pricing will be.
Thank you, Wendy. As you said, we would all classify the market prior to COVID-19 as a buyer's market. So Beth, I would ask you, if it was a buyer's market before COVID-19, what do we call it now, and what does it mean for the market?
So, that's a good question. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that, going into this period, we were not in such a robust market. If you really look at the numbers, we're down now 81% transaction-wise. That was the numbers for May. I think in the entire city last week, there was only 32 contracts signed. So that gives you sort of, an indication of where we are. So what, at least personally for me, I have a lot of things that I would have listed over the last few months that I've held back. So I think what we're going to see over the next 2 weeks as we go into phase 2 is a big increase in inventory, because I know if I'm personally listing 5 new properties that probably would have come on between March and now, I think you're going to see a big influx of inventory. And the question is, will there be buyers to absorb that inventory? I think that the lower end of the market will probably come back sooner. And when I say come back, I think that, the interest rates being what they are, they're very low. If somebody was sort of waiting on the sidelines to buy, it's a good time to jump in and be a buyer. In terms of pricing and where that's going to go, obviously increased inventory and less buyers, I would have to assume the prices will, decline at least in the short term, or until there's some good news in terms of, a vaccine or some change in New York City.
Thank you very much, Beth. To add some texture and context to that, for many people in the community, when the pandemic started and the transactions started to decrease substantially, there was a coming together within our brokerage community, and we appealed to our different multiple listing services and our databases that we all share in common. And we said that we would appeal to them to freeze what we call days on the market. As many of you may know who track real estate, whether you're in the market or not, people are always focused on when a property is on the market, how many days is it on the market, right? And people think about that if a property is on the market for fewer amount of days, it can become very exciting. There's a buzz about it. If it's on the market for hundreds of days, people may think that it's stale. So the databases, they all came together, thankfully, and they decided to pause and freeze days on the market. So if many of you are familiar with sites like Street Easy, for example, you will see days on the market for every property is frozen. No seller wanted to have their property on the market and experience added days on the market without having an opportunity to actually legally show it to buyers. That being said, many people have been asking all of us collectively, is now a good time to sell? And people who wanted to bring their apartments to sell in March, in April, and May, and June were asking brokers questions: should we be bringing our property to market if you're not allowed to show it? So first question is for Wendy, is have you dealt with this with your own clients? And being such an amazing leader that has advised our community for over 30 years, and the wonderful advice that you've always guided everyone in our community, when people ask you, what would you recommend and what have you recommended in the spring and going into summer, do you put it on the market, and what tools do you utilize to be able to market it? Or do you tell them, wait for the summer until we have phase 2 when we can start showing?
So in general, I think there's more specific answers and a general answer. In general, I would say there's very little point putting anything on the market until it can actually be sold. I am not somebody who ever recommends buying something sight unseen. When I read about these sight unseen deals, I kind of cringe. I think you have to walk through the space at least once and hopefully more than once. And right now that's impossible. So I would not recommend putting something on until phase 2 begins and people can start showing. Just to expand on what you said before about the guidelines for real estate also, the real estate board has sent out guidelines about how showings should and will commence once they do commence. And there will be many restrictions in place. And the old days of looking at an apartment and then bringing back your parents, and then you remember, you know, your Aunt Tilly from Oklahoma is going to be in town and you want her to see the apartment and 3 friends should come in and opine. All that's going to be over. You're not going to be able to have as much access as you had in the past. There will not be multiple open houses. If anything, there'll only be open houses by appointment. People are going to be wearing masks and gloves, and probably you will not be able to enter the apartment with your buyer's broker. You'll just be able to go in with the selling broker, and your individual buyer broker can be on a FaceTime call watching all this happen because they're trying to reduce the number of people in the apartment at any given time. So it's not going to be a very simple opening up. So again, people have to decide how motivated they are in terms of selling and whether timing is a very crucial issue before deciding whether to rush to put their apartments on the market right now. But then, of course, that's a very broad answer. Everybody's individual situation is different. So, you know, you need to have a broker that you're comfortable talking to about your specific needs and timing and what makes the most sense in terms of listing your apartment.
Thank you. Beth, you have an amazing track record for being a deal maker and a top producer along with Sammy. What are you telling your clients?
So, you know, I have a lot of listings right now, and I will say that anything that was on the market going into COVID, obviously going into this, we didn't know if this was going to be 2 weeks, 2 months, you know, so I kept most of my things on. I pulled maybe 2 or 3 listings. But I work for a few developers as well, and they've all wanted to keep things on the market. And I will say we've had some activity, you know, not a lot, but it's all been, to Wendy's point, virtual. So, you know, I send videos to people, you know, and try to get them to walk through that way. But buying real estate, you know, residential, at least to me, is a very emotional purchase. And I think somebody, you know, the only deals that I think can be made is somebody who previously walked through the property. They had been there, they had felt the light and the ceilings and the space. And I think even with the best video, it's very hard to have that emotional connection with a property, you know, enough that you're going to buy it. So, you know, the very few deals that I'm working on now are from people who had been through the properties in January, February, and are now circling back to them. But I think that, you know, we'll see once the city opens and we can get back into it, and we're going to have to deal with these, you know, restrictions that Wendy mentioned. But I think being able to get back into the property is super important.
Thank you, Beth. I just wanted to add another perspective that I have heard and shared with clients, which is, although most people have sided with not putting new properties on the market over the course of the early and late spring and will wait for the summer, I do believe that there is a theory that putting a property on the market in spring had advantages. And the advantages that I see are that everyone during the pandemic was in isolation. Everyone was home 24 hours a day, on their phones, on their iPads, on their computers. And a lot of what I heard people doing was they were looking at real estate. They were looking at apartments, at houses, at floor plans. They were following the market. They were studying. They were engaged with brokers on email, on text, asking questions. They were utilizing technology to take virtual tours. So while I agree, I think we all do, that a virtual experience does not replace an in-person walkthrough in order to make a serious purchase decision. But I do think that while people are home and they were focused on studying real estate and learning the market, when everyone is at work, they don't have time for it. But in this case, people had plenty of time on their hands, and I think it was a good opportunity for people to engage, study the market, embark on a relationship with an agent, and figure out a game plan and a strategy so that when we do come back to showing real estate in person, they already had a game plan and a strategy in place. Shifting gears for a moment, in terms of doing business in this environment, adapting, Todd, how have you been handling closings, operating? Usually in the residential world, you do everything in person, in a conference room. And we understand that now your business has been transformed almost completely virtually. Can you tell us what your experience has been?
Sure. So yes, it's definitely residential real estate closings. You could have 10 to 12 to 15 people in a closing room at a given time attending the closing between the attorneys and title and co-op representative and buyers and sellers. And so what we've tried to do on our closings, and these are for contracts that we've had in place since December, January, February time, is we've tried to limit the amount of people that have to be in a room. And so what I've been able to pull off, because there's a little, it wasn't so clear whether co-ops or whether title companies would be okay with virtual notaries, with those documents be able to be recorded properly. And so what we've done is we've had sellers pre-sign all their documents several days before closing and overnight them to the buyer's attorney or to the title company. And then the buyers will meet just with a notary. So it's just the buyers and a notary in a room or in two separate rooms signing documents. And very similar to our other states, but not like New York. New York, at closings, everything is certified checks back and forth between the tables. But now I can tell you in the last 3 months, I probably personally sent 250 to 300 wires minimum for my clients because everything is being done via wire. So that way there's no checks being exchanged at the table. Everything's being done that way. So it's definitely more difficult. I can tell you that, you know, it has been a very hard couple months to get these closings done, but we have been able to get them done.
Terrific. And also similarly, so Adam, I know you have a great background in the mortgage business and have shifted into a niche in the title business. And I understand from our discussions that given your commercial work, that maybe you had a little bit of an edge going into the pandemic in terms of operating in a virtual world. Can you please share your experience with us?
Yeah, similar to what Todd was just saying, commercial transactions usually close via escrow, where all documents are sent to the title company. The title company holds all those documents and then releases them once they get authorization from both sides. Residential transactions are usually done in person with documents going back and forth. Since we were accustomed to handling, commercial transactions via escrow, to make the transition to handling our residential transactions via escrow was actually pretty seamless for us. So we were able to handle those closings, very easily. Some title companies were doing remote notaries, but a lot of lenders couldn't get up to speed on it. They weren't really sure if it was, if it was completely acceptable or not. So when it came to those situations, they preferred to do what Todd was referring to, which is pre-signed documents, have original, affidavits signed and sent to the title company to be held in escrow pending disbursement.
Terrific, thank you. Back to the market, people ask us on a daily basis, in terms of the market conditions, is this a great opportunity to buy? Is it opportunistic? Is now a time to make a good investment? And on the other hand, what if you have a property to sell? And maybe you are selling a property and you need to buy another property. I'm curious about how you're advising your clients about good opportunities to buy. Should they wait a few months? Some people say wait. Some people say react now. If you have to buy and sell at the same time, are you encouraging clients to go into the rental market? Wendy, can we start with you?
Sure. I'd say it's a wonderful time to buy. As you started out, we're in a buyer's market. I think you need a certain amount of bravery right now to buy because everybody's being advised not to do that. But it also depends on what your goal is and where you're going. Because trading up, if you're trying to buy a better apartment than the one you're currently in, that's the right thing to do in a down market because the differential on the new apartment, which is more expensive, is obviously you're going to save more money on that than what you're going to, let's say, lose on what you could have had otherwise for your current apartment. If you're downscaling, those numbers don't work the same way. So certainly trade now is the time. If you've always been dreaming about a bigger apartment, a better apartment, a glamorous terrace or something, now's the time to be looking at those listings, because this is the market that works for you for that. Renting, if you're a renter and now you want to buy, that's obviously the sweetest situation of all, because you don't have to sell something. So I think, again, every situation is different. But yes, if you are renting and you want to buy something, I'd say you should be very actively talking to some brokers right now.
Thank you. Beth, what are you advising your clients? Good time to buy? What if you have a property to sell, or if you want to trade? What is your advice?
So look, I think obviously it's very, very hard to time the market. So is it a good time to buy now versus 3 to 6 months from now? It's hard to say, but I would say that if you're a buyer, this is definitely, we're in a buyer's market. And I think that just from the sheer, low number of transactions, you can probably get a pretty good deal on a property. So if you're looking to stay in New York and this is your home, I agree. It's a good time to trade up, and it's a good time to get in if you're a renter. Selling a property now, I meet with so many different sellers all the time. And I would say the one thing I would tell a seller is that if you are serious about selling and you want to sell, this is not like a market for aspirational pricing. Sometimes you'll meet with a seller and they'll say, well, we thought it was more like this number and maybe we should try it there for a little bit of time and see how we do. I think you really have to be priced right, because I think this is going to be, definitely a value market, and, anyone coming into it is going to want to make a deal. So I think as a seller, you have to really prepare your sellers for that, from the beginning. Because I think if you're not priced right, you're going to sit.
Thank you, Beth. I agree. I tell my clients that I think that right now is one of the best buying opportunities that I have seen in 20 years. And yes, to Wendy's point, it does require some bravery, but many of us in the community, we're not here for a vacation. We're not here to go to the theater. We're here for the long haul, and we're part of this great community that we share in together. And when you feel that way, this is a fantastic opportunity to be a buyer. Combined with that, the interest rates are historically low, and it just presents a great opportunity to do that. Another frequently asked question, which I thought would be interesting to discuss, is people often ask, how would we as a real estate professional compare this pandemic and this crisis with previous crisis? Many of us have been around for the Lehman mortgage crisis in 2008, and previous to that, September 11th. People wonder, are there any similarities? Are there any differences? I'll just share one anecdote for me personally that I think is very different. And that is, I believe that this crisis, for the first time since I've been in the business for 20 years, is redefining the definition of the word home. For the first time, because we've all been in isolation for over 3 months, we are all thinking about, what does home mean to us? What is important to us? Before the pandemic, I think many of us might think about home as a place that we go to sleep in between working long days, many days a week, traveling. And today, people are thinking very differently about their home. People are thinking that the home is now everything. As we all know too well, it's a place, our home is a place where our kids go to school on Zoom. It's a place where now we conduct our professional work. Our offices are at home, our gyms are at home, our family rooms. And so I think the time at home and the isolation has enabled everyone to think about what is really important to us and what do we need to see in a home going forward. And I believe that that will cause some pent-up demand that will take place in the late summer and fall from people focusing and having a better idea of what is important to them in a home. But back to you, Wendy, what similarities or differences do you see?
Okay, so I would actually like to go back to a much older crisis that I lived through, which some of you may not even be aware of, because as Kenny liked to point out, I am the senior broker here. There was a crash in 1987. I don't even know how many of you know that. The stock market actually crashed on an October day. I think that was the largest single point decline, but also anybody financial who's listening in the audience can correct me if I'm wrong about that. I think that was the single largest decline, and obviously it had an effect. And I was a very young and relatively inexperienced broker at that point. I think I'd been working for about 3 or 4 years. And I happened to be out, I'm just gonna give you an anecdote starting the answer. I happened to be out that day with a client who was deciding between 2 or 3 apartments, and he brought along the fellow who had referred him to me, who happened to be one of the top, if not the top real estate lawyer in New York at the time. He was the head of real estate at a very prestigious law firm. And after we saw the first apartment, we were in his car with his driver. It was all wonderful. He had a car phone. I don't even think people had cell phones yet at that point. And the phone rang, and it was his secretary telling him, I think you need to come right back to the office. The stock market just crashed. And he asks her for a few details. And he turns around to the two of us and he says, this is the end of life as we know it in America. And I can tell you, I was a young broker and I went home shaking, and I thought, oh my God, he knows everything. It's the end of life as we know it in America. So I've lived through that. I lived through the tech bubble. I lived as a broker. I lived through 9/11. I lived through 2008. There have been other little, hiccups along the way. You are going to get through this one also. This is different than many of the other ones because we've never been isolated before. I think the social isolation is really the key problem here. But we've had major financial dislocation before. We had obviously 9/11, which was terrifying for many people. Interestingly though, in 9/11, which really should have given a lot of people pause, the market did slow down considerably right after the attack, and that was September. By the middle of December, which is a very unusual time for things to pick up, by the middle of December, phones were ringing like crazy. Again, that was the time when people used to call us. Phones were ringing like crazy. And, I remember going away with my kids and my husband for vacation then, and I was literally just on the phone the whole time. I couldn't see, I couldn't do anything because the market picked up. It's like all the buyers got together and said, now's the time to buy. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen in this situation, and I think it's going to take longer than the 3 months that it took in 2001. But it will happen again. New York will come back. As Adam said, many of us are totally committed to living in New York, certainly to living in our community. So it does feel different in many ways, but I think the one thing that is similar is it is going to come back at some point.
Beth, what similarities do you see from previous crises, and what differences are you seeing in the business and what you're hearing from clients?
Well, I would say the biggest difference that I see with this one is that and I hadn't started in the business in 2001, so I can only speak to 2008, which again was more financial, although it was really heavily real estate based, and this is not. This is a health issue. But the one thing I'm seeing in this one, which, people, I think right now have some fear about being in New York City, which I guess is similar to the 2001, after the 9/11 attack, that people were scared to be in the city. But I think people here feel like, well, I have a few clients at least who told me, well, until there's an announcement of a vaccine, I'm not coming back. So, to Wendy's point of a turning point, I think that in itself could be a turning point, and that could greatly affect our market. If they come out over the summer or in September to say, we have a vaccine and it's going to be available to people by December, I know that there will be people who right now are either in the Hamptons or in Florida or in New Jersey that are going to say, you know what, the market's going to, flip, and we're going to see an increase in activity. And of course, that will hopefully help with pricing as well. So I think that, the one thing that I'm seeing in this market is just, when people are scared, as Wendy said before, like you have to be brave to buy in this market. And I couldn't agree more, because fear in itself just paralyzes people. And I think that until that fear goes away, it's going to be, slow and difficult.
Thank you. I will just add to that. It's been said many times over the last few months that when it comes to bad events, people have a short-term memory.
I agree.
And when I think about the events of September 11th in particular, everyone said that was the end of downtown New York City. Nobody would ever live downtown. And as Wendy pointed out, the downtown New York City, the entire New York City, but in particular downtown, came roaring back. Tribeca, Soho, the West Village, Chelsea exploded from a real estate perspective, as well as people had said after September 11th, nobody's gonna live in high-rise buildings anymore. At that time, 20 years ago, our tallest buildings were probably 40 to 50 stories. Not only did people come back in big numbers to live in vertical, super tall buildings, but now we have 100-story buildings, and people are very happy and excited to live there. TJ, from your perspective in the legal world, in terms of the deals you're seeing and any complications that are arising specifically from this crisis as opposed to the others, I wonder, for example, if you could share, I've heard throughout my dealings with clients that right now during the pandemic and over the last few months, there's a new clause that is going into residential contracts called the COVID clause. So can you share with everyone, what is that about? Also maybe touch on, we had in the past language regarding force majeure, but now there's been introduced a new clause, the COVID clause.
Sure. So in terms of the new clause, so what we're seeing is typically residential contracts, they have a few contingencies. Those contingencies could be financing contingencies. Those contingencies could be co-op approval contingencies. But any contingency regarding being able to move into your building, move out of your building, a lender being able to fund the loan when it's time for closing, the force majeure that you referred to, that a circumstance that wasn't anticipated, out of people's control. These were items that were not in residential real estate contracts. We didn't have them in there. And so I'm just going to be honest with you. I have not had too many New York City or Brooklyn new deals in the last 3 months. I've gotten a few in the last, I'd say 7 to 10 days. But what we're trying to put into these contracts is contingent on being able to move in, to move out of a building. Because why would a buyer want to be forced to purchase a home or an apartment and they can't move in? So they're going to start paying their maintenance or their common charges and their per diem interest, and they can't move into the building. So we're putting into the contracts that it's contingent on being able to move in and to move out of the buildings. In addition, we're trying to have it so that typically a financing contingency is only contingent on the lender issuing a commitment letter within 30 days of a signed contract, but it wasn't necessarily contingent on the lender then funding the loan at the time of closing. And we're trying, again, every deal is different, but we're trying, as a buyer's attorney, I'm going to try to put into my contracts that it's contingent on the lender actually funding the loan, because that protects my buyers. And so we're trying to protect my buyers so that we're not bound by any timelines that are not achievable because of COVID.
Thank you. And Adam, in terms of your area, what are you seeing in terms of similarities or differences or anything that is affecting title and your area?
So because a lot of these city agencies have been shut down, it's been difficult to do some of the searches that we typically do in a transaction, including litigation searches and judgment searches against the buyers and the sellers. So some title companies have been putting in COVID-19 exceptions into their title policies, which pretty much put that obligation on the purchaser and saying, hey, listen, we can't find out if there's any judgments against the seller. So if something does show up, it's on you. We haven't been putting that into any of our policies. The underwriters are not requiring it, but some title companies are just taking it upon themselves. But again, that sort of falls upon the purchaser's attorney in the transaction. If Todd is the buyer's attorney in a transaction and that exception was in the title policy, the first thing I'd be doing is getting a phone call from Todd and saying, hey, I don't want this exception in the policy. I don't want my buyer taking this obligation on themselves. I want you as a title company taking that on, on your end and not on mine. So that's why it's sort of very important when you have the attorney involved in a transaction that specializes in real estate, that they don't just take a title policy from a title company and say, okay, I have insurance. They actually look at the policy to see what kind of coverages they're getting and what kind of coverages they're not getting, because you have 10 different exceptions into a policy, and So no two policies are exactly the same.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to touch on a topic that has some sensitivity around it, which is the media. The media has been promoting throughout the pandemic a message that people are leaving New York City, and people are reporting that people are moving to the suburbs, people are moving to Miami, to Palm Beach, to the West Coast, to Los Angeles. What do you think is the truth? And what are you seeing, start with Wendy, with your personal clients or that you hear in your office from your colleagues? And add to that question is, is there any silver lining from COVID-19 as it relates to the residential real estate market that you can think of?
Okay, so for the first question, the media is having a field day with all these articles about everybody running to the suburbs. I don't find the articles very clear in terms of the data about how many people are going to rent things and is the rental temporary, and how many people are actually buying things. Although when I do speak to brokers in the suburbs, they're all telling me that there's very little inventory left, whether it's rental or sale inventory, things that sold and rented, and it's primarily people who are trying to get out of New York in the immediate surrounding suburbs. So I think there is obviously some truth to that, and the media does like playing it up. I think the Florida issue is a slightly different issue. I think people were already going to Florida before this started, and that related a lot to the changes in the tax law, and they just felt it's too expensive to keep living in New York State. So there was a whole movement among clients going to, to Florida, and some of them were selling their apartments, and some of their attorneys were telling them they didn't have to sell their New York apartments. But there was definitely that also. I forgot what your second question was.
And then
oh, silver lining, right?
Silver lining here. What is there
Okay.
that you think we can all be optimistic about?
I don't really feel it. In terms of the social isolation, there's no silver lining, or perhaps there's a small silver lining. A lot of people have been able to spend a lot more time with their children than they have till now, and I think that I see that with my own children and my grandchildren. My kids all work very hard. Some of them come home late every night, and now everybody's home all day. So if there's a silver lining, maybe it's that parent-child time that's been spent together is really wonderful. In terms of the real estate silver lining, it's not so much the COVID silver lining as the market slowing down silver lining. To me is important in one aspect, and that's that when we were in the very heated market, there were many people who bought an apartment after spending literally 15 minutes in the apartment once. And I used to say, I think you spend more time deciding about a pair of shoes. You might spend more time walking up and down, making sure they're comfortable. You need to sit down in the apartment. You need to see it in the morning. Maybe you need to see it also late in the day. So I think the fact that the market is now a little slower gives buyers the time to really think a little bit more about what they're doing. The downside of that, the little extra time, is it also takes out some of the urgency, and for the market to thrive, we need some urgency.
Thank you, Wendy. Beth, what are you seeing with your clients? What are you hearing in your office, at your firm? Is all reports true?
Yeah, so the Florida thing, that's been going on even pre-pandemic. I think we've seen a lot of people move to Florida primarily since the tax changes, the SALT and things like that. I think that what I'm seeing is right now you're seeing a lot of people leave New York City. I think some of it is temporary, meaning that some of them, they've either rented things in the suburbs or, outside of the city, to be somewhere else during this pandemic. And presuming that school starts again in September in person, they will be back. The people that I am hearing moving, and whether it's moving to the suburbs or Florida, are people that in my mind were gonna move anyway, whether it was gonna be this year, next year. I think what's happened is that has accelerated plans for people. If you were renting an apartment and you were tight on space, you might have said, you know what, this is the time, we were going to do it next year anyway, let's just go ahead and do it. So I think that we will see some of that. And I think that, for the people who it's temporary, and if they do say that school's going back, I think the city will get a little bit busy July and August with people trying to settle for the next school year. If, of course, school is on Zoom again, then all bets are off. I don't know. So I think that, yes, there is some truth to the suburbs, but I don't know how much of it is permanent and how much of it is, somebody took a rental through Labor Day, primarily due to the pandemic.
Right.
So that's my thought on that. And in terms of a silver lining, I think that, to Wendy's point, it gives buyers more time to make a decision. If you're a buyer in this market, it's certainly going to be less competitive, at least, over the next probably 3 to 6 months. So, you can make a better decision and probably get a better price. And I think for sellers, we're just going to have to be patient and price right, and, hope that you only need one buyer anyway. So hopefully we can find that person.
Right. I agree with you both. I think about, in terms of a silver lining, I always think about clients that we probably all have, or friends that have been talking about buying an apartment for the last 10 years. And everyone always wants to time the market perfectly, wait for it to hit the bottom, and they're always waiting for some event to happen before they buy. I think we could all agree is we can, tap our client or our friends on the shoulder and say, I think now's the time.
Right.
So I would say the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, it's open game. Get in the market. It's a great time to do it. It's a great time to be there. Now, to talk about some specific deal points that we're all engaged in, and Todd, maybe we could start with you. There were many deals. What many people may not know is that the fourth quarter of 2019 was very robust for all of us in terms of deal making and contract signings and closings, as well as the first quarter going through February of 2020 was very strong. The market was looking the best that it has for us in a few years, I believe the statistics show. And so a function of that is many of us had deals that we signed contracts on in the first quarter of 2020 with an anticipated closing in March, April, May, or June. Then enter the pandemic. I found in my personal experience, and I would like to ask you all, is nobody was happy. Every buyer that I spoke to that signed a contract pre-March with a closing anticipated this spring or summer, they were furious that they signed a contract. They were convinced they made a bad deal. They wanted to see, is there a possibility to get their money back, their deposit? Are they obligated? The sellers were also all furious because they were saying, why do I have to deal with this? I have a contract. What's the point of signing a contract if people aren't obligated to it? Todd, I'm sure you were right in the middle of the fire zone on this topic. Could you please share with us how you handled some of these experiences and what advice you have?
Sure. So yes, for sure, the first few weeks of March during COVID, I was more a therapist than an attorney. I was fielding calls all day and all night from clients freaking out. And it's just, trying to walk them through their options.
You should raise your rates.
What was that?
You should raise your rates.
Exactly. So you make a good point. The contract, when a buyer and a seller sign a contract, they're bound to each other. And so once the contingencies of the contract are met, we're heading to closing. And one thing I like about this field of law that I've chosen, is that there's usually isn't so much fighting between the parties. Both sides are working towards the same goal, which is to get to a closing. Seller walks away with their money, buyer walks away with their apartment. And so in terms of what's happening, I think it's specific individual cases. So yes, I had a deal where I was a seller's attorney. A buyer was all cash, no contingent. Their business shut down. We were supposed to close in the middle of April, and they just said, we defaulted, keep the down payment. We have no grounds. We're done. Keep the $200,000. But if I was a buyer's attorney, I would be telling my clients, don't do that. Stall. I think the way New York law works is that the seller's attorney it acts as the escrow agent and holds the down payment money from contract signing until closing. And if a buyer defaults, the sellers would be entitled to keep that 10% down payment. But there's certain notifications and certain documents have to be exchanging back and forth for both parties to acknowledge there was a default here, therefore the deal is off, seller is keeping the down payment. If I was a buyer, I would try to stall that process. I would contest the default, and I would say, okay, I'll see you in court in a year. It's going to cost you $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 in litigation to prove in a court of law that I defaulted as a buyer. You know, I want to renegotiate my deal. And if you're a seller, you can either call their bluff or you can renegotiate a deal. I had a seller recently who the buyer's attorney said, we're not closing unless you give us a $20,000 reduction in the price. And my seller decided it was not worth taking it to court, waiting a year to sell it. You can't sell the apartment until the court matter is resolved. And they gave the $20,000 reduction because that was the best decision for them. So I think it's really a case-by-case basis. And, you know, we try to do the best for what our clients' wishes are. And we try to get them what they're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you. Wendy, have you experienced this issue? And have you become a therapist during the pandemic?
Yes, I am an unpaid, untrained psychologist, I always say. Well, we went through this in 2008 to a great degree also with the renegotiations. But there are two different areas of renegotiation. One, as TJ was explaining, was, and you started talking about, Adam, is deals that were signed prior to the shutdown. And then there are deals that were just in the negotiating phase at that time. So both have had some renegotiation. And I can speak for my firm about the numbers. About 40% of our deals have been renegotiated. The ones that were contract signed already prior to the shutdown that have closed ended up renegotiating between about 4 to 5%. 4 to 5%. To me, that's not a very big number, considering the extent of the crisis we're in now. People obviously started out asking for much more than 4 or 5%, but it's a negotiation, and between the brokers and the lawyers, you have to handle the negotiation. For contracts that were not yet signed at that time, and I myself was in the middle of a deal that was, you know, we were waiting to get the contract signed just as things were shutting down. The renegotiations ended up being more between 5 and 10% of the price. And, you know, when you get to the 10%, then you start getting into the issue that TJ was just talking about with, well, does it make more sense to default and lose my 10%? Or, you know, then there's pressure on the seller also to say, okay, maybe I'll go along. That 10% gets people thinking, but I haven't seen something renegotiate for more than 10% yet.
Beth, has your experience been similar to Wendy's? Are you seeing something different?
Well, as you know, because you and I actually spoke about this last month, I have a few deals, unfortunately, where I represent the seller. And I've had the buyers come asking for 20% reduction in the price. In both my larger deals that I have this on, they felt that the market has dropped by at least 10%. And, you know, of course, they're looking for more. And my sellers are of the mindset that we have a hard contract. All the contingencies have been waived in the contract, board approved, you know, mortgage in place. And, you know, why should we give them 20%? So, you know, both of them are currently like in negotiations, but the buyers feel like they can get out of it and get their money back. And the seller feels like we have a hard deal. So, you know, I think they'll both be case by case. I'm encouraging the sellers to actually do a little something just to get the deals closed, because I don't think it's worth going through the litigation and the time. And, you know, it's not only the money, it's the, you know, emotional drama of having to go through that while you're moved out of your apartment and you're ready to close. So yes, I have had it. I've had one deal that we were able to close, and that was earlier in the COVID period. And I said to the sellers, look, he doesn't want to close because he feels like he's not able to move in and start his work on the apartment. And we ended up compromising, and they paid his mortgage and maintenance for 2 months, knowing that it would take at least that long for him to actually be able to move into the apartment. So that one was, you know, easier than these other ones that I'm dealing with.
Thank you, Beth. I also, from my perspective, unfortunately, sometimes during this period of time, we have seen the worst characteristics come out of some of our clients who have a difficult time controlling their emotions. And I have found that the very best we could do as an advisor is to be calm, have a steady hand, and offer practical solutions. So I would say generally, there is nothing good that will come from being litigious and threatening to sue. The courts are all shut down. They're not going to hear these cases right now. There's no guarantee that they will ever hear these cases. Judges may decide that any disputes that result from COVID may have to be settled in arbitration. They may split these deposits 50-50. We've not seen times like this before, and no one should opine on what the end result will be. And the best solution is to be calm, practical, and offer solutions. We've been getting a lot of questions from listeners regarding the rental market. So I'd like to switch gears for a moment and talk about a couple of thoughts. One is for people who are in the rental market and their lease is coming due and they have to renew their leases. Do we have a sense of what are the vacancy rates in Manhattan? If it is the case that people are fleeing, or people who were in rental apartments left their apartments, or maybe it's younger people who were sharing apartments and they left to be with their families and they've not returned back to their apartments. It would appear that there's going to be more rental inventory. And the question is, are there incentives out there? Are people paying brokers' fees? Is there free rent available? If you want to stay in the apartment that
I can't hear him.
Adam,
We couldn't hear you, Adam.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Just the last sentence or two.
Sorry, so the question is, if you're in an apartment that you want to stay in and you want to renew, can you renegotiate, and what is the best way to go about it? So there's a few questions there, but focused on the rental market. Wendy, can you talk to us about your experience?
Okay, well, I don't do very much in the rental market except for in the investor condo, then rent out the apartment market. So I can't really tell you a lot about what the big landlords of the big rental buildings are doing. Although I suspect if they have good tenants, they will renegotiate if necessary because they don't want to have empty buildings. I would be very surprised if the landlords won't renegotiate. I don't believe they're going to renegotiate on signed leases already. I don't want anybody to think that's what I'm saying. I'm saying if your lease is coming due now, you might be able to renegotiate. You certainly should not be faced with an increase. I mean, that goes without saying. But you might be able to renegotiate. But there is going to be a lot of inventory if a lot of young people, particularly young people living in some of these rental buildings, have gone to their parents or out of state, et cetera, and freed up a lot of apartments. I have one friend who's a landlord who told me every time somebody calls him and says, I can't pay the rent, he says, you can give me the keys back, your lease is canceled, and I'll take the apartment back. And he doesn't, try to work out a long-term arrangement with them. So his inventory is definitely building up, but he's planning on negotiating if he has to with new tenants to get them in.
Thank you, Wendy. And Beth, do you have any experience that you could share that may be helpful to people who are in the rental market?
Yeah, so I would say, and I similar to Wendy, I handle mostly rentals for investor clients of mine. I will tell you, I'm about to list an apartment today that I'll be renting for the second time in 3 months, and this is the second one I'm doing this year. So I am seeing people who are breaking leases, just, as you were asking. And per the new, our lease changed last year, and per the new lease that we're using in New York, a landlord is obligated to try to re-rent the apartment, to let them out of the lease and re-rent it. So at this point, that's, what we're doing. I think that we will see increased rental inventory. I think the vacancy rate the last time I checked was like 14%, which is fairly high. I expect that number will grow as, number one, more people leave the city, and a lot of the people that are going to be moving, even if it's temporarily, are probably going to rent their apartments. They'll rent them or sell them. So you'll probably have more inventory, not only from landlords, but from individuals who are going to leave the city either for, now or for the year, and they're going to want to rent, instead of sell. So we'll just have to see how that plays out.
Thank you, Beth. We have a few more questions. Go ahead, Todd. Did you want to say something?
No, I was just trying to hear you. I apologize.
Okay.
I'm good.
So I was saying we'll just have 1 or 2 more questions, and then I think we have to wrap up. So one question from one of our listeners as it pertains to the rental market is they mentioned that there are a variety of mobile applications like StreetEasy, Zillow, Trulia, where rental listings are available? And would we recommend to people and people in our community, if they are looking for a rental, are they best to do that virtually and go on one of these applications to find an apartment? Or would they be better suited to find an agent, and would they be a good resource? Wendy?
In general, I think you're better off working with an agent who can give you, a history of the market, can point out pitfalls, can talk about different landlords. You're better off finding a good rental agent, I think, than trying to do it yourself.
Understood. And Beth, what is your opinion?
Well, I agree with Wendy. I also want to point out that, and this is a whole other conversation, which, Wendy and Adam probably are familiar with, but StreetEasy and Trulia, those sites are also going to change, and being on, not everything is going to be on StreetEasy going forward the way it has been due to just industry changes. So I think that if that's the only place you're looking, you're probably missing a lot of inventory. I personally have listed stuff and I've rented it even during COVID that never even went to StreetEasy. So you're definitely not going to be able to, get the same inventory amount just by looking on StreetEasy and Trulia as well.
Thank you, Beth. On that note, I want to say to everyone in the community that both Beth and Wendy are two of the greatest superstars in our community and in the residential business. And if anyone ever needs resources or advice, they would be an amazing choice to go to. And if there are any reason they're not available, I would be happy to offer my services as well. But thank you as well to TJ and to Adam. You are all fantastic. To Kenny and Leah, thank you so much for arranging everything for today.
Adam, thank you very much. I want to thank our entire panel, to Wendy Greenbaum, Beth Benalloul, Adam Peldman, and Todd Zuckerman, and Adam Modlin for moderating. All of you have put together today really a fascinating moment for us in terms of what's happening within the residential market in New York. And I think it's been very informative. I see a lot of comments that have come in and questions. We apologize for those that we could not yet get to, but the hour is getting late, and I know that people have many other things in their day. Once again, thank you all for being with us today. I wish you all, please God, safety and health. And again, let us just join together in praying for those that need our prayers in every direction. All the best to you, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks, Kenny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.